So, hello and a very warm welcome to everyone attending today our Train the Trainer workshop. We hope to give you some insights on how to conduct 15-minute butterfly observations and how you also will become a butterfly expert and also be able to train others and carry the message further. So first of all, I would like to introduce our team. Here we are. So so the VielFalterGarten and UNPplus team in Germany. I will talk a bit more about the projects in a second. So we are working at the Helmholtz Center for Environmental Research and the Center for Integrative Biodiversity Research in Leipzig. And Aletta Bonn is the head of our department, Biodiversity and People. Guy PR is our butterfly expert and conservation researcher who will present the second part of this workshop today. My name is Stephanie Henkel. I'm a postdoc at UFZ IDIF and I coordinate both projects, VielFalterGarten and UNPplus. We also have wonderful helpers in the project. Nina Stratil is our research assistant, Ala Govo, our master student. We have two volunteers, Ada Fühling and Svante Spichale. And we also collaborate closely with Friends of the Earth Germany, BUND, with Maya Reichert and Roxana Becker. We also work closely with the city of Leipzig, here with Konstantin Sope and Michael Schulze. We collaborate with different cities in Germany, with Mannheim, which is coordinated by Frieda Brett-Smith and Hannah Bolz, and in Berlin by Vincent Kretschmer and Vivian Lovette. We also collaborate with other European cities. I will go into that a little bit later. So the agenda for today, first we do a little introductions. I would introduce the project, VielFalterGarten and UNPplus. And then you will get to know butterflies, get to know species and how to become a multiplicator. What does it mean to be an ambassador, how to communicate it, and here every species is a story. And you will also have the chance to know what an elevator pitch is and know how to approach other people. Then we will do a closing round and see what can I do, what can we do as individuals, and what do you need if you want to be an ambassador. And we talk about the VielFalterGarten UNPplus package we can offer you. Okay, first of all, why monitoring? So we know that in the past over 30 years, since 1989, insect biomass declined rapidly for about 75%. You may notice that when you have a car and you drive and your window shields are way less full of insects than a couple of decades earlier. So, and how do we know actually that this is happening? This is because a lot of volunteers are going out every day or in regular intervals at the same sites with the same methods over a long period of time. And if citizens do that, if every person can join that, we actually call that citizen science. So monitoring is important to know what happens, like how insects or how the trend is. And why do we actually use butterflies? So butterflies are actually really important bioindicators. They react very sensitively to the environment, and they indicate if the quality of green spaces change. They are important besides bees, they're important pollinators, they're a big part of biodiversity, and they're actually very popular. Everyone likes butterflies, they're very beautiful, and they're relatively easy to recognize, and we know a lot about their biology and their life cycles. So, and there are different actually methods how to monitor butterflies. One method is the transect method, which started by Ernie Pollard in 1977, and this is actually, you set a certain area, a transect, which is usually about 1 kilometers along with certain sections, and you walk at the similar speed, slow speed along this transect, and you look for butterflies in this imaginary box with like 2.5 meters to each side and 5 meters in front and above you, and record species that you recognize. And with that, actually, the transit method spread throughout Europe, with over 4,000 transects being run at the moment, and we can actually then monitor the declines and see the loss on a European level, also on a German level, with Tagfalter monitoring Germany. Deutschland started in 2005 and also recently published the index of the Greenland Butterfly Index in 2025. However, this method is rather for experts. You need to go out really every week, ideally, and you need quite a good knowledge of butterflies. Another protocol is the 15-minute method that was introduced in the French butterfly garden monitoring in 2006, where you actually spend 15 minutes in your garden. Here it's focused on the most abundant and obvious, like easy to identify species. And by now, actually 12,000 gardens throughout France participate in that. And the nice thing is that 65% of the observers reported that they also reduced the use of pesticides in their gardens. So this method of monitoring also actually introduced a behavior change and engaging citizens. And this was actually the example we followed in VielFalterGarten, which we developed in 2020 as a joint project with the Friends of the Earth Germany, the BUND, the City of Leipzig, and UFZ IDIF. Our goals were, first of all, education, to tell people about what's happening with biodiversity, butterflies, citizen science, to collect data everyone can actually join. Of course, protection of the butterflies, and to build a huge network for long-term, sustainable implementation and monitoring. And we had two measures. So first of all, we want to observe and we want to count butterflies in the city. And we also try to change the management and to go to a biodiversity-friendly, butterfly-friendly management style. So we have a huge, by now, collaboration partners. We collaborate with different organizations. The project was funded till 2025 from the BFN, the Bundesamt für Naturschutz. And since 2025, VielFalterGarten is part of the project Urban Nature Plans Plus, which is funded by the European Union. I will talk more about that in a second. And the City of Leipzig also funds VielFalterGarten as VielFalterGarten 2.0. So we started in 2020 with only 22 participants. Half of them were a part of our team. We had 17 registered sites, 42 15-minute counts, and 116 butterflies observed in the first year. That also started during Corona, so it wasn't really easy. By now, this has quite grown. We have over 1,000 registered participants. The active community that is really collecting data regularly is much smaller, but we have really an engaged community who go out and go into the gardens over 60 times throughout the season. So we have really committed community. We have over 400 registered sites by now, over 2,500 15 minutes count, and about 10,000 butterflies observed at the moment. And now I come to Urban Nature Plans Plus, so through which VielFalterGarten also continues to live on, Fun and European Horizon project, which has the aim to create thriving biodiverse cities across Europe, where biodiverse spaces are valued and accessible by all, with a goal really to transform so that urban nature is the norm and not the exception anymore. We collaborate with 12 academic institutions in this project and with 5 cities, which are Barcelona, Paris as our lighthouse cities, and Burgas, Mannheim, and Belgrade as the greening cities. And actually, our role, our tasks in the project is the expansion of VielFalterGarten, expansion of the 15-minute method across Germany. So Mannheim and Berlin are already very, very active. We also have Lage, Lippe, and also to expand to other European cities, as Belgrade is already growing the community, Burgas, and other cities. And yeah, we are glad that we still have the Friends of the Earth and the city of Leipzig on board. So how does it actually work? So first of all, yeah, how do we become an observer? So we use the 15 count method, as I already mentioned, and the theme is really everyone counts butterflies and every butterfly counts. So that means it's a very simple method, very easy, and really everyone can join. How it works is you actually choose your favorite place, which can be your own garden. It can be a section of a park, a public park. It can be, it can also be your balcony or any green space you frequently visit. You download the Butterfly Count app, which we use in the European context outside of Germany. In Germany, we actually use our own app, the VielFalterGarten app. And then you register the site you want to visit regularly through the app. The EBMS app is already updated, so you can do it through the app. Or in Germany, we still do it through the portal, but we also already update at the moment this app, so you can also register the site through the app. And then all you do is you go out and enjoy the weather. You go out with good weather, really, when it's sunny, when it's not that cloudy. It's good weather conditions between like 9 and 5 p.m. And you spend 15 minutes in your garden and you count and identify all butterflies you can see. It's also important that you report if you don't see any butterflies. So 0 counts are also very important to us. And if you are unsure which butterfly it is, so we have really easy options. If you see, oh, it was a white butterfly, but I don't really know which species it was, you can also do type in unidentified white, or unidentified brown or orange. So this already also helps us to estimate abundances. And then it's important also that you come back. Optimally, it would be that you come here every 2 weeks. As I already mentioned, we have really engaged observers that do that really a couple of times a week. A lot of people tell us, oh, it's really, for me, it's super nice break at work when I sit at the computer the whole day. They like to go out in their break and just go into nature for 15 minutes and count butterflies. So optimally you do that every 2 weeks in the season between April and September. But for us, it's already sufficient if you have 3 observations throughout the season. Yes. So I already said that project and site registration is now possible in the Butterfly Count app. For Germany, for VielFalterGarten, we also have analogous reporting sheets. If you don't like to use the app and want to be out without technology and just enjoy, we also provide these sheets. And then it's a bit more work because we also have to type it in, so it's actually nicer to use the app, for us at least. And then we, of course, not only want you to observe the butterflies, but our mission is also to improve green spaces in urban areas. And this can be, in the park. So we collaborate, as I said, with the city of Leipzig, and they actually changed their management styles of over 80 green spaces throughout the city, which contains like a reduced mowing regime, so they mow less, or they introduced flowering strips or meadows. So that was really successful. But also our volunteers improved their gardening and their measures in their allotment gardens or in the private gardens. We also regularly gave out like seeding mixtures, like seeds or nectar plants, also that you could have for free. So yeah, the citizens were really engaged there. We also collaborated with schools, with community gardens, or also school gardens, where a lot of change happened towards butterfly-friendly gardening. Yes, and how do you actually do that? So some suggestions that we give, of course, first of all, avoid pesticides, then mow less, like really less is more. And it's important to not mow everything at once. So do the staggered mowing, leave always one small area unmowed, and then also rotate the areas that you do mow. Leave the hedges untrimmed, and Guy will say more about that in a second, why this is important. And also leave fallow land standing and plant local plants, which is really important for the species, and yeah, create structures. So create diversity, because we always say the motto diversity brings diversity creates diversity. So the less you actually manage, the less you do in your garden, the more wilderness there is, the more structures there are, the better it is. And with that, I would actually like to hand over to Guy. He will give you a small detour to our agricultural areas before he will tell you more about butterflies and how to identify them and how to bring the message across.
Yeah, thank you, Steffi, for your presentation. And thanks everybody for being with us. And yeah, my name is Guy PR. As Steffi mentioned, I'm leading the group on agriculture and ecosystems in the Department of Biodiversity and People in IDIF in UFZ. And together with Steffi and the great team, we are leading the project VielFalterGarten. And indeed, also looking beyond urban areas. And for those of you who might attend but think of scouting in other areas, we thought we shortly mention also other monitoring protocol, which is the one for agricultural areas. So this is part of another project, another EU project, Agroecology Transect, where we developed and actually continue developing from Project Cup4EI in Germany, developed the protocol and adjusted it for other conditions, with particularly the idea that if we want to support the nature restoration regulation, where butterflies are now an official indicator, we need more observations in agricultural areas. We need thousands of observations potentially, and we're not sure whether the transect method will be enough for covering all the information that we need about the impact of a given measure. So within Agroecology Transect, what we did was to propose a different protocol or a slightly adjusted protocol to compare between the field edge and the inner part of the field. So the idea would be that, again, you need to select a site which would be at the border of a field, but then also potentially select another site within the field. We try to standardize the area into 25 on 20 or 50 on 10 or 100 on 5, which would be kind of 500 square meters. And of course, you need to register the site. It's very important both for urban areas and for agricultural areas that we always know more about the sites. How do they look like? Take pictures, register what are the dominant habitats, etc. Because with that, we can analyze the data much better. And then again, we try to count and identify all butterflies. And we do try both in the urban and agricultural areas to try to avoid counting duplicates. So if you're not sure if you see the same butterfly twice, then don't count it, and then raise your head and try to see whether how many butterflies you see at the same time, so the maximum number of a given species. And you don't need to worry that now you might count again. The numbers are not strict, but at least to try to avoid duplications. And again, we need to try and come back again and count at least 3 times during the season. Probably September until September is the peak season. But within that, we are concentrating also in an even shorter period between middle of June and middle of August, at least in Central Europe, where the 3 visits that are minimum for us should take place, so that if we don't have enough time, money, or accessibility problems, then we try to do that over a shorter period. So this is kind of the agricultural protocol. If you're interested in that, you can download that from the Agroecology Transect website, or you can contact us for that. Now we probably, as trainers, we want to move to the other side of the story, which is how do we learn about butterflies? How do we address this question of the diversity of species that exist? And just as an example, in Germany, this is a beautiful poster that the group of Tagfalter Monitoring Deutschland, or Butterfly Monitoring Scheme Germany, developed. It's cut into 2 in that case, but this is a poster that you can hang in different places, and it's a very beloved poster. It shows all the day-flying butterflies in Germany, all the species that you can see. But if you want to not just see butterflies, but also understand them and tell others, then you need to get to know them, the same as the diversity of people and cultures. So what I want to do in this part is to get to know a few species in a way as we often teach about butterflies to other people. The first example is the Coma, or Polygonia C album. This is the scientific name. In Germany, it's called C-Falter because it has the sign of C in the back of the wing. And here you can see the life cycle of the butterfly. Life cycle would mean from the beginning to the end of the life of an individual, starting with the egg being laid on burning nettle, a very common species in gardens. Then you see the larva immediately after developing, growing into the larva shortly before pupating, and then they hang themselves. They stop feeding at some point and start looking for a place where they can hang themselves. And in this case, they hang themselves from above. They create a funny J structure, and at some point after 24 hours, they would stretch themselves down with the head, and the skin will break, and out of that will emerge the new skin, which is actually the pupa. And after about 10 days, 2 weeks, the adult will hatch out of the pupa, strengthen themselves, expand the wings into the final form, and then, of course, look for mates. The males are territorial. They will stay on the plants and try to find a female and defend the territory. And in the case of this species, they will overwinter as adults. So they do 2 to 3 generations per year. The first generation takes less time, so 1.5 months more or less. But afterwards, the autumn generation, the adults will remain with us. And these are the same individuals that we see in October and later on in March, April. So they are among the first ones to be active in spring. The reason I'm telling this story is because this is not the only species feeding on nettle. There are many others, like the red admiral, painted lady, the European peacock, and many others. And that means that if we leave nettle in our garden and let it grow and grow wild, then we might see things like this house here. You can see the closed leaf in that case, within which the larva of the red admiral is hiding. They don't want it to be seen. So if you look for larvae, you probably wouldn't see them. But if you know how to recognize the closed leaves, then you might find something on your plants. So just leaving nettle in your garden would be a very simple means to allow the butterflies of many species, including others that I'll show later on, to survive in our gardens. And that's a very simple means that can go into the wildness or natural garden. Another butterfly that I wanted to introduce is the common brimstone, or Gonepteryx ramni in Germany, Zitronenfalter. Is a very conspicuous species. You can see them easily already in February or March. If it's warm enough with climate change, we even have seen butterflies in November, December, or January. And they are amazingly robust butterflies. They overwinter again as adults. And they have a defrost structure in their body, so they can overwinter outside. Even if it's -20 or -30 outside, they still survive. They overwinter within hedges or within bushes, ivy, or tree crevices. And that's also why they're one of the first species to come out when it's warm, because they feel the warmth and they can fly around. The male is yellow. The white is creamish whitish. This is actually potentially one of the butterflies that are called butterflies. Maybe that's the reason for this word, although there are other theories about this question. And they lay their eggs on buckthorn or alder species, so rhamnus is the scientific name, which are typical plants that would grow on your hedges, meaning that if we cut down the hedges, we will harm the larvae developing. So one of the simplest means to have more brimstones in your garden and other species would be not to cut your hedges completely. And so one of the things that is very unintuitive to people is that, yes, we can cut our hedges in winter when the birds are away, but some species will benefit from not cutting the edge at all. So the common brimstone is one, but also the black-veined white, which became very, very rare, almost completely absent in urban areas, but also in rural areas, or the holy blue Celestrina agiolus. These are species that are coming to the hedges, but in the case, for instance, of Apore krataigi or the black-veined white, they overwinter as caterpillars, and other species are overwintering as eggs. So not cutting the hedges is another means to benefit many species of butterflies that are otherwise absent, and are indeed among the species that are declining fastest in agricultural areas, but also in urban areas, simply because we have these aggressive management of hedges, thinking that we can cut them down during winter, during the overwintering period of the butterflies. The third butterfly I wanted to introduce today, at least in depth, relatively speaking, is the common blue, Polymotus icarus, or Hauhechelbläuling in German. The male is blue from the upper side, the female is brown, so they are very dimorphic. They have a dimorphism, basically. Some females might be actually blue a little bit in the upper side, but still they have the orange spots on the upper side. And both of the male and female have these points on the underside. When they're landing, they close the wings, then you can see these beautiful patterns of orange and bluish, and they lay their eggs on a variety of different plants, ranging from clover to many leguminous species, and they produce 2 to 3 generations per year and overwinter as caterpillars. They're very flexible. They can occur from 6 months a year to even 8 or 9, or even if it's warmer, 10 months a year. So they're very flexible, and the response can even produce 4 generations in warmer areas per year. So because they eat clover, which is a typical species that occur on grasslands and particularly on lawns, if we cut more often, they will appear pretty frequently on lawns. However, if we cut too frequently, of course, they will not manage to develop as larvae, and they will die. And they benefit from cutting the lawns or mowing, because this frees the space from grasses. So if we want to free the space for the common blue, then we need to mow the garden. So it always comes to the question, should I mow or not, and how frequently? And in order to answer this question, maybe I'll give another example of another species. This is a marbled white, which, although the name says white, it belongs to the Edelfalter, or to the Nymphalid family. And they fly only in July, August. They produce only 1 generation a year, and the larvae feed on grasses. They have a very strange behavior where they don't lay eggs, meaning they just drop them from above. So the female's flying around the place and throws the eggs from above. The eggs look like a golf ball, more or less. They're very hard. And the larva will hatch after a few days and then go immediately towards dormancy, or what you call diapause, as a larvae within the tufts of grasses or under stones. And they will wait for next year and then start feeding only in April, May, pupate underground, and then hatch as adults. They're very, very common. They're hyper abundant in rural areas where there's grassland or fallow land, particularly unmowed areas, but extremely rare within cities. And that's partly because we are mowing so frequently. So to the question of mowing or not, the answer is mowing less is very important. Leaving unmowed areas, and particularly leaving some areas unmowed completely for 10-25% of the area left unmowed and overwintering until the next summer, not just until spring, but until summer of the next year, will give sufficient time for a full generation time for these species that really need the grass uncut for a long enough period. And there are other options of cutting in a less aggressive way, so larvae of the many species that feed on grasses can benefit And so basically what we're talking about is better management of prairies or meadows instead of lawns in order to allow more species to survive. And if we leave different areas under different management, then a heterogeneity within the mowed areas will allow more and more species to occur, given that they have different needs. Some need long grasses, some short, some need clover or other plants. And so for the diversity of species occurring in meadows, we need to have a diversity of management types. And this is why staggered mowing is so important. So it's not about when to mow, but how to mow, and not doing too much once or twice a year or even 3 times a year is still fine, because we also sometimes want to sit on the lawn, and that's more than legitimate. Another example of a species we wanted to introduce today is Papiliomachon, or the swallowtail, quite a rare species in many areas, but very, very beautiful. It's one of the biggest butterflies in Europe. Very charismatic species, and everybody likes them. Even the larvae are extremely conspicuous on the plants, at least when they are large. So this is a larva just before pupating, and this is a pupa. In this case, the pupa is hang on the plants. They feed on carrots, on dill, fennel, or other plants that are basically what we grow in our gardens or in the field. They're not damaging them because they eat very small amounts and they lay their eggs singularly on the plant, so they're definitely not a pest in any form. But one very important thing is that they overwinter as pupae on the vegetation. So on those ugly structures of the dill or carrots that stay there over winter, when we take these away because they disturb us, they're not as beautiful in winter, then we actually kill the pupae. Meaning that if we want to have these species occurring in our gardens, we don't only need to have carrots or dill, but also leave this vegetation uncut during the winter, even if it's not that beautiful. And this is true also for many other species that overwinter as pupae, like the small cabbage white or the orange tip. In that case of the orange tip, they overwinter as a pupa as well, but they need this vegetation to lay down like for the entire period from summer all the way into the next spring. So they have 11 months as pupae on the vegetation. So yeah. Now, before we finish the introductory part of butterflies, we thought of going through a few more butterflies, not as in-depth as the other ones, but simply in order to get to know them, for the case that you want to explain to others how to differentiate the species when we do the 15-minute count. And one of the typical things we see is just something flying around the place. And then we need to distinguish between many different white species. And the first tip to give is to get the permit to carry a net with you, try to capture them, or wait until they land and try to go behind them, take a picture. Because when we see a white butterfly, very commonly we tend to think that this is a small white. However, it could be also the green-veined white, which especially in spring might be as common as the small white. But they have these green whites in spring, and these become black veins later on, and not always the veins are very, very clearly marked. But if we see 2 or 3 veins structured compared to a homogeneous structure in the case of small white, then we know that these are 2 different species. And if you're not sure, when you use the app, you can always put Pieris rapi or napi, or I'm not sure if it's green veined or small white. The app will allow you to register basically a group of species, or as Steffi was mentioning earlier, unknown white is also fine. And you can also select by size a small white, or it might be another species. So unfortunately, as it is, especially with climate change, there's an expansion of other species, so it becomes even more complicated. In Germany, we are seeing the southern small white expanding, and they are typified by an irregular structure of the points on the upper wing, still a homogeneous structure from underside. But if you see this irregular structure, take a picture, share it with us, share it with the others. We will try to help you identify. In the worst case, we know that often when you report a white, small white, we don't automatically assume that it's one or the other species. So don't worry about how we analyze our data. Some people are still confused between the small and the large white. And one tip to give you is that the large white is really large. The second thing is that they have an extensive structure of the black on the edge of the wing, and the points are no longer points, they're actually patches of black on the wings. So you can recognize that even by flight. When you see them flying around, you'll see quite a lot of black compared to the others. And if you don't see black points at all, then you're actually looking at the female of the brimstone. So don't get confused between the large white and the brimstone. She's white, but not as white. She's a bit creamy. And if they land and on the other side you see it green, then obviously you're looking at the brimstone. Another example of two species which are typically flying already in April or even in March if it's warm enough, we've seen them this year already, is the large tortoiseshell or the small tortoiseshell. In German, interestingly, they're called große Fuchs and kleiner Fuchs. So in this case, we're talking about a fox in German or tortoise in English. They're very nice butterflies. They sit often with the open wings. The males are territorial again, so they will fly back and forth and come back to the same spot. And sometimes, especially after overwintering as adults, both of these species, by the way, are eating nettles. So there are more examples to the nettle feeding butterflies. So once they're very old, are already 6, 7, 8 months, they might look quite similar to each other. However, there are some typical differences between them, particularly the different coloring of orange that the small tortoiseshell has compared to a more homogeneous structure for the large one. We have a lot more black in the small tortoise, and we have the differences of the black points all over for the large tortoise along. So this helps identifying between the different species. You can see also that the dots are differently organized. So here are some examples of how to identify them. Finally, another example we wanted to put for meadows is the small heath butterfly, which is actually quite small. When they fly, they're very orange, but when they land, people are somehow getting confused between them and the meadow brown. And if you compare the male and the female, the meadow brown will almost always have these two different colors of brown, whereas the small heath has very clear patch of white, or what you call a white band. And finally, although the points are almost invisible, and sometimes during late season, late summer, the meadow brown is relatively homogeneous, that it makes it a bit difficult to identify. They have these two eyes in the back that helps recognizing them. Some people also get confused between them and the dusky meadow brown, which is a lot more rare, in some areas completely absent. They don't have the two eyes in the back, but if you're not sure, very typically this is quite likely you are seeing the meadow brown. So I think the last example I wanted to give is the common blue, which I talked about earlier, compared to the brown argus, which is not as common, but they fly in the same habitat, often in urban areas. And one way to identify them is, first of all, that the brown argus never has the blue either in the upper or the lower part of their wings. So they're really brown. But the other thing is that the points are disorganized. If you compare the common blue, they have a triangle of spots in the back side. I find it at least very indicative compared to the disorganized structure for the brown argus. And this is important for us because if you recognize them, we know that we are becoming experts. And finally, from the upper part, they have a point. So when they lie down and enjoy the sun in the lawn, then you'll see this upper point. So with the picture of these, you can share it with others, and we will help you identify them. For the sake of time, I will not go through more species today, but I wanted to just show you species that are very difficult to identify, and we assume that you will not manage, the small skipper and the Essex skipper. For the skippers, our tip is to look down, to look around you, especially when you walk in the 15 minutes. So don't stay in one spot, but walk around the place. Because those species are very unconspicuous. They're not very easy for people to even see. The differences between them are marginal, so we assume that normally you will not manage to see whether the color of the antenna is black or orange, but we just want you to get the feeling that some of them are very homogeneous from the upper and lower part compared to those species of skippers that have some coloring around some structures. And if you manage to recognize that they have these structures, you'll see also the difference compared to the silver spotted skipper, and then slowly you're becoming an expert and helping others to observe these spots and be more aware of them. So the tip is we're typically looking for butterflies by looking forward, but actually a butterfly expert will tend to look more downwards toward those butterflies that are flying very low and are not as easy to notice because of that. Okay, so once you got to know the species, maybe it's also the time for us to discuss how do you tell others about butterflies. Steffi and I will guide you now through this process of what does it actually mean to tell about butterflies and to be an ambassador of the projects. And first of all, as you may have noticed, what I've done when I told you about butterflies had a certain narrative, a certain approach of how we are telling about butterflies, and we call that the VielFalterGarten narrative. And so the idea would be to take as little amount of time as you need to give the most important information. The second thing will be to talk to people, to spread the words and to tell about the projects so that you can engage them and use the love for butterflies in order to engage them into monitoring, into citizen science, in order to get this feeling that they can do something for the environment rather than only be worried about the loss of insects. The third thing that we can do is that each of us can bring other organizations like cities, like NGOs, or simply hobbyists that like walking around and want to spend their time counting. So what is the VielFalterGarten narrative? VielFalterGarten, by the way, for those who didn't or don't speak German, is a word game. The idea is that it's Vielfalt, so diversity, and Faltergarten, or the butterfly garden. Falter in German is butterfly. And so the idea that we're trying to achieve is that we choose a certain number of species, just 2 or 3 or 4 species that we tell about. And in a given context, we try to choose the best species that will suit our interest or what we want to tell about. And then we try to choose butterflies that would help convey a message. And then there's a certain method in there, which can take just 20 seconds or 30 seconds to convey. How does it look like? What is it, the time that it is flying? So if you talk to people in April, you'll put an emphasis on the orange tip. But if you talk to people in July, then you'll talk about, I don't know, the summer butterflies that are flying around. Most important is what is the host plant? So what are the caterpillars eating? Because once we know what the caterpillars are feeding on, or the larvae, then we also know how to protect the species or what to plant in our gardens. How many generations do they produce? Those butterflies that have only 1 generation a year are typically very, very sensitive, but those that have 2 or 3 generations are much more flexible. And then once we know what they feed on, so what are the host plants and how they overwinter, then we know what to do. For instance, if you have nettle in your garden, after telling you that most of the nettle feeding species are overwintering in adults, then it's not a problem to cut the nettle in winter. It's not a problem to manage because it doesn't damage those butterflies. And if people are aware that a certain butterfly is overwintering as an egg on the hedges, then it's obvious that we shouldn't cut our edges. So it takes 10 seconds from the knowledge of a butterfly to understanding what the measures are, and they're very intuitive. And that's more or less the point of the elevator pitch that we want to talk about. So that's something we will talk about in a few seconds. The other thing that we want to explain in the Train the Trainer now is the idea of building a network. Here's a network that a colleague of ours, Jennifer Hauk from Kono, was doing together with VielFalterGarten project, where every year she was mapping the development of the network of people and organizations talking to each other and telling about butterflies and being partners in the project. And what she said was that it's extremely important to make sure that there's a network of people helping each other, because if everything depends only on one person or one organization, then you don't have stability for the system. So building a network creates stability, just like in a diverse system or biodiverse system, where we need that network of people and organization that can stabilize and tell the story. So telling about the story, how do we do that? Not always people will come to you. So sometimes you need to come to them and tell them the story. And that is the idea of what we call an elevator pitch. So just imagine to yourself that you have a great idea about butterflies, you want to engage people, but the person is walking in the park. They look at you, you are walking with a net, I hope, so that you are more visible and people are really interested in seeing what you're doing, but they don't approach you. So yeah, you have more or less 10 or 20 seconds to approach people, or you're standing somewhere in a stand where you want to explain about the project and people come to you and say, what are you doing? Or you have a poster in your, or a postcard in your hand and they want to know what you're doing. So the idea would be to tell about the project within just a few seconds, thinking, what is the message I want to convey? Or what question can I use in order to come into a dialogue with people so that they're interested in doing that? Steffi, would you want to join me in telling people how we might be able to give an example about?
Oh, hello? Can you hear me?
And let's give them some examples of how would we tell about the butterflies? How do we tell about the project if you have an example? Maybe you were standing in a zoo, for instance, people were approaching you and asking, what are you doing here? What are we doing here?
Yeah, exactly. So sometimes we have our information stands and we want to talk about the project. So one idea that always works quite well is to ask a simple question. That means like, do you like butterflies? And they're very, very, or I have never had an encounter where people say, no, I hate butterflies. So everyone really likes them. And then you can go into the conversations like, hey, we have a cool project here. Would you like to contribute to science and help us observe the butterflies? And then you can go on and talk a bit more if they're interested. If you feel like, oh, they're not interested at all, then you can also save your time and energy. So, but like this opening question, like, do you like butterflies, is really easy to get them into a conversation. Or if you happen to be outside and you see a brimstone, a Zitronenfalter flying around, and it's a really yellow one, and it's maybe March or April, and he's like, oh, look at this male brimstone over there. He's like 7 months old. And then people are really impressed and think like, oh, wow, where do you know that? And it's quite easy to get in contact then with people. So about the small stories, yeah, it's to create a hook and get people's attention. And that can happen with some simple sentences or, yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, and I wanted to give another example of an elevator pitch, which typically happens to me when I'm walking around with a net and I see people in the field, or I have postcards in my hands or whatever material, and I need to approach them. And sometimes I would need to say, I don't want money from you. I really do come to talk about butterflies. We have a project where we are trying to bring butterflies back into town. Do you want to join us? Do you want to hear about it? And we also tell them immediately, like, so VielFalterGarten is about bringing butterflies back into town, and we're doing that together with the city of Leipzig. They're trying to improve the parks, but they need us in order to see whether it works for the butterflies. So we're engaging people into counting butterflies so that we can see if it works. And I've just conveyed this information within about 15 seconds. Or in other situations, as Steffi would say, I'm looking at a butterfly suddenly and say, oh, wow, there's a male flying around, a male of a brimstone. Or it's like, what, a male? Or, oh, there's a butterfly defending a territory. What, territory? So people getting an anecdote suddenly are immediately aware of that. And becoming interested in that. And another case I wanted to give was that I've seen a person working the hedges in July in a protected area. I was really shocked about it. And I was not sure whether to approach this person at all because I thought he would be really upset at me if I start making comments about I don't cut hedges in summer in a protected area during peak season where butterflies are laying their eggs. And instead, I kind of asked him if he likes butterflies and whether he knows the Zitronenfalter. He was working outside and there was one passing, so the brimstone. And I started telling him what we're doing, and he said, I didn't know that. So he didn't know that the butterflies are overwintering on the hedges. And I just gave him this tip, like that if you leave some of the hedge uncut, then they will survive a lot more. And he was like, wow, I didn't know this thing. And I can do that on my hedges. I'm managing 500 kilometers of hedges per year. With that tip, I can actually do something. And he was really excited. And I was completely surprised about that. But approaching this person took just 10, 20 seconds by asking a question and getting him interested in what he's seeing around. And that was it. So these are two examples. Steffi, do you want to give another example of an elevator pitch or another situation, maybe in a different context, or should we move to the final stage?
I think we should move to the final
Okay.
messages.
So in that case, we will shift to the last part of our presentation and wrap up in a few seconds. Now it's not in a full presentation mode. Yes, as I mentioned earlier, one very important thing in the elevator pitch or in talking to people is always to be ready with a story, to be ready with an anecdote, for instance, about territoriality or about the differences between males and females. And finally, in order to spread the word, you need materials and you need your own tips to become an expert. So we are assuming that many of the people listening to us are not necessarily butterfly experts. So in the case of the German book, the example for the German case is the book called Schmetterlinge, die Tagfalter und Widerstand Deutschland. This is a book that is called kind of a Bible. It's produced by the team of Tagfalter Monitoring Deutschland, TMD, Sepp Zettele et al. This is already a new production of that book, and this is kind of our Bible. But in every other country as well, you'll have your Bible or your own book where you typically have the pictures. Take the book, learn how to use it. Usually at the end of the book, there's not only the pictures per butterfly, but also the comparison between the different butterflies so that you can learn how to differentiate between them, so that when you open the book, even if you don't know the butterfly that you see, you can learn it together with the people in the field, and you don't need to feel uncomfortable to share with them. I don't know which one. Let's try together. And amazingly, even with kids, they manage quite well, and you can take the time as well with them to learn the butterflies. But the most important thing is to see what are the characteristics, when are they active, so am I going in the right season? If they're very rare, then it's less likely you see these butterflies. So is the species common enough? Is it occurring in my area? And collect the most important information. What are they feeding on? So that you know also what is the habitat where they occur. And with that, you already know a lot more than any other person. And if you know what are the typical butterflies in your field, using the guidance material or other materials that you can get also from us, or asking simply ahead of time, what are the typical species in my area? From the database, we can export it for you. These are the means to get to become an expert of your own area and help others. This Train the Trainer is aimed not only to German speakers or in Germany, but also for other countries. We want to mention that in the EBMS, the European Butterfly Monitoring Scheme website, there's huge amount of materials that you can download, guidance material for every country in Europe by now, particularly the EU. So feel free to go there to look for download material or to talk to us if you need your own material. Collect your anecdotes is something we mentioned. Do the 15 minutes yourself. If you speak from your own experience, then you can guide others. If you haven't done that and you don't know how to use the app, then it will be very difficult for you to explain it to others. As a tip for anybody that has been using the app before, but hasn't tried it recently, there's now the option also in the EBMS butterfly count app to register the site through the app and to register your observations to a project so that you can register it to UNPplus, to VielFalterGarten in Germany, or to Agroecology Transect if you are in other countries or in rural areas as well. In the field, final tips are to wear green if you look like a plant and you move slow and you learn how to walk slowly. Watch your shade. Don't forget when you come to take pictures of a butterfly, not only you are moving, but also your shade. If there's a bit of wind, you can use the wind to move a bit faster with the wind. This is what many species are doing. So watch your cat and learn from them how to approach them. And if you learn how to move slower, you'll be able to take your mobile, even put it in front of you. And with mobile phones, you can do really good pictures that are good enough for recognition. Share these observations with others. You need to establish WhatsApp groups or Telegram Signal, whatever instruments you want to use in order to communicate with others. And with that, the learning experience is a lot faster when you help each other. And the sharing of experiences and the learning jointly helps everybody learn and feel that they're part of a community, which is really, really important. And the final point about butterflies is to walk behind them and see what they're doing. A female usually really needs to spend a lot of time egg laying. Behavior is very common. Usually the female will refuse, and then the female would lie down, open the wings, and the male will hover around and try to convince her. Of course, it doesn't work because she would refuse. Or if you go into a hilltop, often you'll see hilltopping butterflies, etc. So just watch them, learn them, and you'll be already an expert by yourself. And final point for anyone who wants to train others, we told about the story of the transect monitoring because it's important also not to get confused between the different approaches and groups. You'll need to talk to the butterfly monitoring scheme coordinators to see how the narrative also fits so that you don't get confused between the different programs. In some countries, it's the same program. In others, it's a separate program, as in Germany. So talk to the BMS coordinators to make sure that everybody is coordinated and nobody gets confused. And finally, talk to us. We are more than happy to send you materials, which we have been preparing over the time. The project flyer, the material about how to become a multiplicator in Germany or an ambassador. We have the protocol for urban areas, but also for rural areas. We have brochures. We have signposts that you can adapt. By now, we are also developing QR codes for outside that one can hang if you want to take a site-based approach instead of a person-based approach, where you basically put signs saying we would like to have people counting here, handouts, postcards. We have a lot of material for you. And don't forget, as I mentioned, that there's also a lot of material being prepared by a lot of other experts in the EBMS, Christina Sevilla, and many other people who have been working hard to prepare these materials in Embrace projects in spring, etc. With that, I would like to thank you for your attention. Thank the many volunteers. Thank the VielFalterGarten team for the great work and the UNPplus, but also thank the funders for support. The European Union is funding the project UNPplus and is funding also Agroecology Transect and the City of Leipzig for the funding of VielFalterGarten this year. Thank you for your attention, and I stop sharing the screen.
Yeah, thank you for your attention as well from my side. We can move on to questions now, but for now I would stop the recording and thank you for everyone watching this video.
Thank you. There has been a question from the audience, why do we use nets and how? And so to those who haven't used so-called sweeping net, the main point is that many butterflies are flying too fast. We cannot recognize them. And from experience, the identification rate is much higher if you have the time to catch them, to look at them, to put them into a box, look at them shortly, and then release them. Pay attention to the important thing that, first of all, most butterflies in most countries are protected species. So if you want to use a net, you need a permit. Check what the regulations are for your country. Typically, common butterflies like small cabbage white or cabbage white in general are not protected. However, carrying a net, especially if you're in a protected area, is forbidden unless you have a permit. So be aware of that. Talk to your coordinator. If you are the coordinator, of course, you know it, and you can help the others getting the net. And then for those people that are engaged, it's worthwhile taking a net and getting to know the butterflies. So this is a typical net that you can buy. Some of them are very expensive. This is an unfolding net, so it can be folded. You can carry it in your backpack. And I would strongly recommend to buy those nets that are either green or black. You usually would have the option to buy a white net, and I would strongly recommend to avoid that because white butterflies will tend to avoid you when you're carrying a white net. So my tip is green or black. If you don't have the money to pay for those very expensive nets, Actually, one can build them yourself, but it needs to be from material which is sensitive enough not to ruin the butterfly. So this is a folding net. It has the stick as well. Usually you'll have the option to prolong the stick, which I don't recommend strongly because actually with a short net you can control it a lot better. Carry it like this so that it's not hanging around the place when you're walking, and then you need to control it with 2 hands so that it's not flying around. If you have lots of thorns or things like this, always make sure that the net is clean. If you have thorns or plants inside, it could ruin the butterflies. So you could always flip it, make sure that it's clean, and be ready for the next butterfly. If you see a butterfly, one of the typical ways to catch it would be, it's called a sweeping net, to sweep it. And then it's inside. Again, it's turned like this and back, and it's inside. I do it another time slower. So I do a movement like this and back. Butterfly would be inside. If the butterfly is lying down or on a flower, you can pull it and then try to have it stretched so that it's ready for any use with the finger pressing on it. In that case, you can make the net fall very quickly on the butterfly. In that case, what happens is that they will try to escape, but then because the net is upwards, they would always fly upwards into the net, except for some very smart butterflies that will fly downwards or make themselves fall down when you do that. Once you catch the butterfly, we have the veils. If you don't have a veil or didn't buy one, you can actually use a single-use plastic box or on glass. But the important thing is that you need to be careful in putting that slowly inside the net. And then we have a sponge. If you buy that, typically you'll get that with a sponge in order to press. As much as it sounds a bit stressful for the butterfly, press on the butterflies so that they don't ruin themselves. This is a very important thing because if they fly around in the glass, they will ruin themselves, and that's a pity for their wing structures. So if you're not well prepared to that, don't do it at all, or look into the net, try to take a picture through the net and then let them fly out. If you do have the veils or something else, then try to make sure that they're not overstressed and ruining their own wings. And at the end, pull the sponge outside slowly so that they can go out. They will fly upwards, and then they will either sit here or here, and they can fly upwards. Make sure while you're watching butterflies or taking pictures, or if you have them in the net, not to have them in the sun. If it's 25 degrees or 30 degrees Celsius and there's direct sun, they will heat up so fast that within 2-3 minutes, some of the butterflies might already die. So there are some tips about how to do that. Be in the shadow or use your own shade to make sure that they're not exposed to the sun, and simply release them as fast as possible. The nice thing is that once you take a picture through that, the recognition is so good that an expert, of course, can take the picture and tell you also later on whether it was correct or incorrect. You can share it with others and then get the recognition quite fast. You could always correct also on the portal later on if you're not sure. But of course, that once an expert can look at these pictures, then the identification rate for the data you've collected is a lot higher to the benefit of everybody.
Be sure that you don't leave them in as short as possible, like leave them out as quickly as possible again.
The good news is if the net is clean, if you keep on these very basic rules, which is very easy to practice, then the number of cases where you kill the butterfly is marginal. I'm not saying it never happens. Sometimes you hit them with a net, so you need to learn how to do that a bit more carefully, but it's really marginal. We've been working with kids, with many groups, and let's say it's 1 to 100 or even less. So the damages are typically very low. And if, of course, you're looking at very rare butterflies, which is not the case in urban areas, and the chance of damaging is very low. Okay, I think you can stop recording now.